it working? You can't hear, just scream. Again, I want to thank you for coming. This is the second in a series of 3 programs. The next one will be December 11th and not next Wednesday. And we are discussing Beethoven, and as you know, I have a pianist who will be out here very shortly. He will be out here in a shorter period of time than he was last time when I spoke about 20 straight minutes on Beethoven. We're going to get into more music, and in this program on the Beethoven sonatas, we are going to cover Beethoven from approximately 1801 to 1806, and that's sometimes called his middle period. And last week we ended our program with the joyous happiness of the Opus 10, the Opus 14, number 2, which is the 10th sonata of the series of the 32 sonatas, which, by the way, Hans von Bülow called the pianist's New Testament, the Old Testament being Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. Beethoven, as we said last time in 1800, found life good. He felt powerful. He was attracted to many people. He thought of marriage. He was most appreciated already. Only Haydn was more famous. Haydn would die in 1809. As you know, Beethoven was born in 1770. So let's put that in proportion to the other members of the Viennese classical school. Haydn was born in the year that George Washington was born, 1732. And Mozart, the next in that great line, was born in 1756. He died in 1791 when he was only 35 years old. Beethoven came to Vienna the next year to live. As you know, he was born in Bonn, Germany. Well, not only was he appreciated, he had enough money to live on. He didn't have to go to work every day. He had powerful patrons. And most of all, Beethoven was convinced, as no artist perhaps in the history of music up to that time, and perhaps it is part of the mystery of 19th century Romanticism itself, that he was convinced that music had tremendous power. Music was a force, and it even had a morality. Beethoven trusts music above all else. Indeed, he mistrusts language. He was awkward in language. He was an awkward man in all ways. He could not, and I'm so proud of him, dance. In fact, I've never seen a pianist, at least of the male gender, who could really dance well. Women pianists do. He was very awkward in everything. It was said that every piece of furniture was in peril. If there was ink on the piano as he was writing, by the end of the day, the ink would be in the piano. Everything jangled, and of course, as he became more and more deaf, he kept pounding and pounding, trying to, with his tactile sense, feel the sounds that were erupting in his great brain. But as I said, he trusted music. It had a power. This was the beginning of Romanticism, although Beethoven is a member of the Viennese classical school. He said to the beautiful Elizabeth Brentano, "When I open my eyes, I must sigh, for what I see is contrary to my religion, and I must despise the world which does not know that music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy." The wine which inspires one to new generative processes, music. And I am the Bacchus who presses out this glorious wine for mankind and makes them spiritually drunken. Beethoven went on, I well know that God is nearer to me than to other artists. I associate with him without fear. I have always recognized and understood him and have no fear for my music. My music can meet no evil fate. Music is the one entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, but which mankind cannot comprehend. So that was his religion, music. Now, I would like to introduce David Syme, who was here last week going through this taste of the Beethoven sonatas. And I can't help it if in some ways it's confusing because we have such a wealth of thematic material. Perhaps you could tape these, I don't know. But as I said, please buy the Arau recordings, the Schnabel recordings, the Brendel recordings, the Anton Quercy performances of the 32 sonatas, the Wilhelm Kempf. I know you'll be poor after buying all of these. However, it will be well worth the attainment. David Syme will begin a European tour of several countries in January. He is going to record works by Gershwin with the Royal Philharmonic. He has already recorded the Prokofiev First Concerto, the Beethoven Third, I believe, the Chopin Minor. He loves music, he loves Beethoven, and he wants to play these passages for you. So, if you give him a little encouragement, he'll be right out. Beethoven returns now to the four-movement plan. In the last four of his 5 sonatas, he went into a 3-movement format again. This sonata is in B-flat, and he was especially proud of this work. He writes about it in a letter, and he also tries to get top dollar from it from a publisher. Well, Beethoven is at the point in his sonata writing where he is testing out his knowledge, so to speak. It almost seems as if he wants to produce a textbook kind of example of this form. The work brings us to 1800. Beethoven is 30 years old, and if one could pinpoint within one work the ending of his first period, it is here in the B-flat sonata. Brendel said to me that he felt that Beethoven has mastered in this piece a certain manner. It comes almost too easily to him. Listen to the confident and blissful opening subject. The Adagio con molta espressione is a sweet and sad song. Now, Beethoven makes certain of no scherzo in this movement, something new that he had invented. He places the third movement in minuet form. The rondo is gracious. Beethoven ends the 18th century on this rococo and gallant note. In the next sonatas, in fact, in all the rest, he would sail in uncharted seas. Nothing again would ever have the surface smoothness of Opus 22. Beethoven's piano writing would become thornier, his writing more orchestral in nature. It was never a pianism that was comfortable, really. Indeed, Dussek or Clementi are more felicitous for the hand, but he is always fascinating to practice, and not a kernel is ever perfunctory. Although Beethoven was always asking for improvements on the pianos of his day, and he was the first to realize the piano's enlarged resources, it is extremely interesting to note that 20 of the 32 sonatas were composed for an instrument no greater in compass than the later 18th century harpsichords and clavichords, or Mozart's piano, that is to say, from FF to F3. As Wilfred Mellers writes in his book, Beethoven and the Voice of God, Beethoven wanted to discover the whole through his music, the completeness. This was Beethoven's life task, and it may be that even his deafness, which we normally think of as an affliction peculiarly terrible for a musician, was a condition of his supreme achievement. At once, his deafness is a physical fact and a spiritual allegory. It shut him off from external reality and helped him to concentrate on his internal reality of sound. So Beethoven's life, like Hegel's conception of reality, is a becoming that advances only through negation and contradiction. His life was a flux, but its goal was rest. After Opus 22, his life became a battleground for survival and growth. He is no longer that young Prometheus conquering the aristocrats of Vienna. He's afflicted with something that was awful to him, to us. His art now becomes his refuge and really his only reason for being. In the magnificent sonata in A flat, Opus 26, Beethoven departs from the first movement in sonata form, that is, an exposition, a development section, and recapitulation. He opts for a set of variations and on a theme of lyric, almost Schubertian beauty. Mozart had once started his A major sonata with a set of variations, but there is nothing here of Mozart. The theme is filled with possibilities, and one feels Beethoven could have written 100 variations on this theme, but he limits himself to 5. It was one of the most played of Beethoven's sonatas in the decade following his death. Chopin, who was rather intimidated by Beethoven's awesomeness, yet liked this sonata and played the first movement in public, only the first movement. Indeed, it may have been the first Beethoven sonata ever performed in the United States in the year 1819 by the daughter of an important American composer by the name of James Hewitt. Just don't know her first name, I'm sorry. Can we hear that theme? maybe some variations. I love that last variation. It's marked dolce, sweetly. Now the second movement is a scherzo filled with exuberance. While the third movement is a march, not just a march, a funeral march for the burial of a hero. Certainly not as profound as the great funeral march from the Eroica Symphony, but this one is rather operatic. I think it's a public funeral. The finale, marked allegro, is a highly organized rondo. It's almost a perpetual motion. The sonata in A-flat, this sonata, finds Beethoven deep in formal problem solving. This work, called the sonata, is without a sonata movement. And in a way, it's a kind of a suite. Yet it is so chemically organized that the movements somehow need each other. Beethoven creates unity from within. In performance, the pianist's special problem in this piece is to present what Edwin Fischer called the psychological composition. The next sonata is a work also from 1801. It's in A-flat, it's opus 27. It's a masterpiece which has been greatly neglected because of its sister sonata, opus 27, number 2, the celebrated Moonlight. Well, in both of these sonatas, Beethoven felt compelled, as he was more and more making the form into something different than it had been. He was compelled to add a subheading to the sonata, and he called it a sonata quasi una fantasia. In the E-flat sonata, he is breaking new ground. The first movement is highly unusual in that the tempo is slow, with an insertion of a quick section. It's like part dance and part drama. You know, then the next part is a stormy allegro in C minor. But extraordinary inner rhythmical energy, so potent. Well, this almost tuneless drama there is perfectly ready now for this eloquent adagio, which we can only call Beethovenian. The crown of the work is really the finale coming up. At the end of this movement, he also goes back to the slow movement. Kempf calls it a song of thanksgiving. We now arrive at the justly famous sonata in C sharp minor, Opus 27, number 2.
David?
Yes.
May I cut in here for a moment?
Of course.
You mentioned Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And we didn't rehearse this, by the way. Thanksgiving is upon us now. And all right. Thanksgiving is upon us now. And David Dubal gives an annual Thanksgiving Day address at Juilliard. And I'm grieved to have missed that. So I hope that at some point that you will somehow touch upon the theme of Thanksgiving. I mean, and you started it. You mentioned Thanksgiving, so that's my grieving.
David, I'm flattered that you remembered my important Thanksgiving address about the killing of 40 million tom turkeys on Thanksgiving in the name of football and whatever we do on that day. But I can never repeat anything twice, like Beethoven. And I don't remember what I said. However,
you said that 40 million turkeys give their lives every year so that people can watch football games.
Yeah.
And the way that this was brought up was that someone in the class said, as the class was leaving, "Happy Turkey Day." And David's face assumed a cloudy expression, and he looked with venom at the student. And then he said, "Class, please sit down." And then he proceeded to address them about these 40 million turkeys, tom turkeys.
It's more dramatic than I even knew. But I did say that, symbolically, there's no doubt that I will have on Thanksgiving Day a bacon, lettuce, tomato. We are getting back to that great Moonlight Sonata. The title was given by Ludwig Rellstab. He was a Berlin poet and music critic, and upon hearing the first movement, he saw moonlight over Lake Lucerne. And we can really forgive him his literary illusions. The piece really must have been a shocker for people of 1802, for here is a slow movement of such a hushed mystery that one may say that here was truly something new under the sun or moon. The emotion expressed has nothing in common with anything of the 18th century. It is a new romanticism. The emotional vein of this work would be mined many times by the Romantic composers, but Beethoven himself never needed again to delve into this type of movement. The work's romantic allure is further accentuated because it was dedicated to a 17-year-old countess whom Beethoven was at that time in love with. Her name was Giulietta, and she has been the inspiration, probably, maybe she was, maybe she wasn't, of Beethoven's passionate letter to an unknown woman, and the letter has been called The Immortal Beloved. It's a romantic document, very filled with the German romanticism of the day. It's a long letter with such passages as, "O God, behold the loveliness of nature and resign your soul to that which must be. Love demands everything, and quite rightly. Thus it is of me and you you with me. O God, so near, so far, is it not a heavenly dwelling place, our love? Your love made me at once the happiest and unhappiest of men," etc., etc. He goes on for 2 pages. It is, however, very interesting that we don't know at all who Beethoven's immortal beloved actually was. Beethoven was always in love, especially at this period, but an actual attachment to a real woman was not for him. Beethoven was rather in love with love. It is interesting that Beethoven, that great synthesizer of emotion, could write of romance, could portray it in music, yet his music never has anything carnal in it. He was, in actuality, a moralist and very high-minded. He idealized women as he did his mother. The erotic element is perhaps a feeling that he felt was unworthy to be captured in his music. Certainly the strains of the first movement of the sonata have a mysterious chastity as a pale light glimmers above the whispered triplets. Let's finally hear a second from this great adagio sostenuto. Claire de Lune?
Oh, that's the other Moonlight, I'm sorry. My parents had this Liberace record, and they were one after the other. All right.
David. What a lament. Well, you will all go home, of course, and play that later in the day. The second movement, an allegretto list called A Flower Between Two Abyss. What a contrast. We finally breathe again. There is the tonic of nature. It's not a scherzo, it's not a minuet, but contains elements of both. That movement is a perfect resting place for the demon's wading flight, which is the last movement of the Moonlight. Presto agitato. Eric Blum wrote, clearly brilliance as well as eloquence and action is the intention here. Moonshine and the lake of Lucerne have vanished, and so no doubt has Beethoven's infatuation with Giulietta, whom such towering passion must have terrified if she could have understood it. Indeed, the probability is that few of Beethoven's contemporaries grasped such music as this, stuck fast as they still were in 18th century conventions. In this sonata, Beethoven's finale is not a rondo, but a mighty sonata form. It surely was the wildest music of the time, with its heated, frenzied, upward arpeggio theme. As the Pathetique Sonata, as you remember I said, was the first instance of music having this palpitation and anxiety. Here, though, we have a ruthless element. Can we have a glimpse? And as you already know, David, you'll learn it, the rest of it tomorrow. Let's move to the fourth piano sonata of that period, number 15 in D major, opus 28, published in 1802. Wonder of it all is that Beethoven was at work on all of these last four sonatas at the same time. It was given a title, Pastoral, not by Beethoven, but by a publisher. Publishers have always known that a title can help make a piece a bestseller. And certainly a 25-minute piece, it can help. The fact is, I have seen many a person, and I love this work dearly, sleeping during a performance of this piece. It's not easy to hold together. Well, we're not going to give you all of it. However, you know, the title Pastoral is not really bad. The whole work is magnificently gentle. It has a pantheistic feeling. Beethoven at one with nature. Beethoven was happiest when alone on his walks. He made many references to nature in his letters and conversations. Beethoven had no belief in organized religion, but his faith in a Godhead is revealed when he rhapsodizes on nature, such as, Almighty One, in the woods I am blessed. Happy everyone in the woods. Every tree speaks through thee, O God, what glory in the woodland. On the heights is peace. O God, send your glance into beautiful nature and comfort your moody thoughts, touching that which must be. Or, he writes, how happy I am to be able to wander among bushes and herbs, under trees and over rocks. Woods, trees, and rocks send back the echo that man desires. In the country, it seems as if every tree said to me, Holy, holy. Nature is a glorious school for the heart. It must be remembered that the early 19th century, already aware of industrialism, made a desperate, romantic attempt at nature worship. Poetry from Wordsworth to dozens of German romantic poets. Oh, they found the Alps, they climbed it, they painted pictures of it. How would Beethoven find today's jammed highways as we feebly try to escape the noise of the city? Can you imagine Beethoven spending a weekend in the Hamptons? Let's listen to a bit of the first movement with its wonderfully repeated low Ds, as if... Oh, this movement is just the most beautiful. The next movement was supposed to have been a favorite of Beethoven's. It's in D minor. In the scherzo, it's economy itself. It's literally built from fluff. Also, in the trio of this scherzo, Beethoven writes 4 bars in B minor, goes back to D major. Something about B minor he didn't like. It's the only allusion to B minor in all of his sonatas. He seldom composed as Bach loved B minor. I would love, David, to call Beethoven up right now and ask him why he didn't use B minor. In the finale, we find a young shepherd proclaiming a bucolic tune in 6/8 time. We now come to the Cinderella of Beethoven's sonatas for piano, the least played, it seems, yet so fresh, bold, and clever. At this period, 1802, Beethoven said, I am dissatisfied with my work. I will seek new paths. Let's listen to the frolic of the first movement. Beethoven's second movement is an adagio grazioso. There is no other slow movement even vaguely like it. Kempf says the piano assumes the role of a prima donna, glittering with enchanting graces. Brendel says it's like an ironic comment on something old-fashioned. It is a mixture of old-fashioned embellishments and prophetic coloratura. It was written before Rossini's operas came to Vienna, and yet it has very much of an Italian coloratura aria about it. There is a mixture of love and irony that is very strange, and if the player can manage to convey it, it can be very effective. The rondo is based on a gavotte-like theme. There is humor and even Beethoven's sense of the grotesque in this piece. The next sonata is in the... Oh, I'm so sorry. Opus 31, number 1 in G major. We have moved from Opus 28, the Pastoral, to Opus 31, the 3 in that set. And the next one is in the fateful key of D minor, Opus 31, number 2. And it has another unauthorized title, The Tempest. How did that happen? Well, it is a tempest. However, someone said to Beethoven, what's the emotional key to this? And Beethoven said, read Shakespeare's Tempest. A work so totally different that there could be nothing in common. Well, he begins this great work with a slow passage, another new touch adding to the classical sonata form. It's a calm before the storm. The work is dark and filled with tensions. The adagio is pristine. It is amazing that it is a sonata movement with an exposition and a recapitulation, but it does not have a development section. Beethoven truly writes slow music. The finale in 3/8 time is an allegretto and another sonata structure. The whole movement is based on an unbroken 16th note plan which passes to a throbbing, repeated, biting mordent. In fact, the word mordent means to bite, which pierces the heart in this case. Kettner says that the last movement of the Tempest is like a wistful farewell to youth. We turn to the Sonata Opus 31, number 3 in E flat. It's in 4 movements. Edwin Fischer called The Tempest Beethoven's masculine psyche. And this one he felt was more of Beethoven's female psyche. It's a work filled with light and courage. It's healthy and it's vigorous. The first theme is full, and it leads to a tune of such pregnant joy, Beethoven is absolutely chirping like a bird. Again, this work is filled with formal innovation. The second movement is not a slow movement, but a scherzo. And it's not in its usual 3/4 meter, but in a 2/4 pulse. And Beethoven called it a scherzo, and in mood it may be, but he cast the material in sonata form. Again, no slow movement, but the scherzo is followed by a minuet of a gracious, old-fashioned feeling. Beethoven's grasp of unity in large form is without doubt unrivaled by any other artist in history, musical or otherwise. We now find ourselves in a perpetual motion in sonata form. Let's hear a sample. Last time we said that Beethoven was not a quick composer in the spirit of Mozart, where inspiration, the intention, and the realization came full-blown, perfect, and seemingly effortless, or as in the lyric prodigality of Schubert, who actually slept with his glasses on, so when he got up in the morning there would be no time wasted, because all night long the magic fountain of melody was flowing. So he wanted to get that paper and pen ready, and of course it was nearsighted. As Beethoven's manuscripts show, he was an endless shaper and molder. He was not interested unless it was formed from every possible angle. Indeed, a Beethoven movement has much in common with the greatest sculpture. It must be heard from many angles. The listener must move around it, so to speak. It is of great interest to read the master's own words on his creative process. He said, I carry my thoughts about me for a long time, often a very long time before I write them down. Meanwhile, my memory is so faithful that I am sure never to forget, not even in years, a theme that has once occurred to me. I change many things, discard, and try again and again until I am satisfied. Then, however, there begins in my head the development in every direction, and inasmuch as I know exactly what I want, the fundamental idea never deserts me. It arises before me, it grows. I see and hear the picture in all its extent and dimensions. They all stand before my mind like a cast. Although I am always involved in many works of different types, there is never the possibility of confusion of one with the other. I cannot tell you where I get my ideas. They come unsummoned, directly, indirectly. I could seize them with my hands. Out in the open air, in the woods, they come while walking, in the silence of the night, early in the morning, incited by moods. These tones sound and roar and storm about me until I have set them down in notes. Then, as the notebooks attest, begins the most excruciating labor and gestation that any artist has ever gone through. We have just sampled then this outpouring of the piano sonatas. Of course, they were all born to be played by himself, usually at night for the aristocrats, which loved his music. Beethoven never, by the way, gave a public performance of any of his solo sonatas in Vienna. His work, which was published, though, as soon as it was created, was circulated and studied by his talented aristocratic patrons and pupils. At this time, however, he felt the need to teach other than just talented aristocrats. He taught the child Czerny at this time and the very fine pianist Ferdinand Ries. Both left accounts of their deep association with him. Beethoven was a very impatient person, to say the least. And yet, he was the most patient of teachers. Czerny came to him at 10 years old. Beethoven worked hard with him, never charged him a penny. Perhaps this is why Czerny never took a penny from Liszt, the little child Liszt, who was poverty-stricken, who came to Vienna and studied with him daily. And maybe that's why Liszt never took a cent from any of the students that came all over the world to study with him. And yet, these were not even vaguely rich men. Czerny reported that on the winter day when his father took him to meet the 31-year-old master, Beethoven was wearing a morning coat of some long-haired, dark gray material with trousers to match. His coal-black hair bristled shaggily about his head. He had not shaved for several days. By the way, he was so occupied mentally that often he'd shave only one side and forget the other side. I also noticed, Czerny said, cotton, which seemed to have been steeped in a yellowish liquid in his ears, although he gave no evidence of any deafness. I played to him Mozart's great C major concerto, and he expressed satisfaction, which gave me courage to play his own Sonata Pathétique. I went to him several times a week. He kept me for a long time on scales in all keys and greatly concentrated on legato playing, which he himself controlled to an incomparable degree. Beethoven, by the way, later entrusted Czerny with the piano teaching of his beloved but very difficult nephew, Karl. We'll get to Karl next time, for it is a tragic chapter in the history of Beethoven. It was with his older student, Ferdinand Ries, that Beethoven He became acutely conscious of his growing deafness. On a walk together outside Vienna, Maurice pointed out to Beethoven a shepherd playing a pretty tune on the flute. Beethoven had to admit to him that he did not hear it. He grew very despondent over this incident. It was really the first incident that he could not get away with what he was already trying to keep from people. Beethoven had already been painfully aware of hearing problems and kept consulting different doctors who kept him in a constant state of frustration. He was not happy with anyone knowing his condition and tried to hide it from all but his closest friends, and he begged those that he did tell to tell nobody of his affliction. In these early years of the approaching deafness, he was in a state of desperate torment. "Oh, if I were rid of this affliction," he said, "I could embrace the world. I am the unhappiest of God's creatures. The worst part was there was always pain." He wrote, "My ears whistle and buzz continually, day and night. I can say I am living a wretched life." We always think of the deafness as just a stone silence. He was sometimes hearing thunder in his ears. It was horrifying. "For 2 years I have avoided almost all social gatherings because it is impossible for me to say to people I am deaf. If I belonged to another profession, it would be easier. But in my profession, it is an awful state. The more so since I have many enemies." On the advice of a Dr. Schmidt, Beethoven spent the summer of 1802 in the secluded village of Heiligenstadt. The doctor was convinced that his hearing would improve by leaving the city, where the demands on his deteriorating hearing would be less. Can you imagine Beethoven before his deafness in a subway in New York? I wonder what the difference in noise pollution to Vienna 1802, New York 1985. It was during that summer that Beethoven wrote out a long letter to his brothers. This letter was found after his death. It was very carefully copied. He had put it away. He wanted the world to find it. It is known as the Heiligenstadt Testament, written in the autumn of that year, and it explains where Beethoven stood, in a sense, how he would handle his future. Or as Sullivan writes, it marks the complete collapse of his old morality of power and shows the experiences that made possible the erection of a new morality of power on the ruins of the old. Ernest Newman once said that it was not unusual that Beethoven contemplated suicide at that time. What was unusual was that he didn't do it. The document is an explanation to his brothers, but really to the world, almost asking forgiveness for his behavior. "O ye men who think me hostile, stubborn, or misanthropic, how unjust you are to me. You know not the secret reason for this outward appearance. Since childhood, my heart and mind were always inclined toward gentle feelings of goodwill. I was ever eager for great accomplishments, but remember that for several years I have been in a hopeless condition, made worse by senseless doctors. How hampered I was by my malady. I was compelled to live in loneliness, and yet I could not admit such an infirmity in a sense which I once possessed in the highest perfection, a perfection such as few surely in my possession ever have enjoyed. I must live like an exile. If I approach near to people, a hot terror seizes me." And Beethoven goes on to say that if not for his art, he would have died. But that occurred during that summer when Beethoven was in this small village. Beethoven's realization that his hearing had not really affected the quality of his work at all. Indeed, the creative force in him became more and more compelling. With each new work, he felt a sense of victory. His human suffering was now a fact. It was an acceptance, a reality. In a sense, he had become fearless. Beethoven never again even asked anyone how a work sounded or if he made any miscalculations. That's how confident he was of his inner processes. Success now was very unimportant. His personal life now was unimportant. I shall seize fate by the throat, he said. Beethoven now embarked on his so-called middle period, a time of creative victory. He would soon not care who would know if he were deaf or not. It is the middle period which the world at large responds to the most. It is the Beethoven of the Titanic Eroica Symphony, the Appassionata, the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies, the Emperor Concerto, the Razumovsky Quartets, and so forth. Never had there been such a volcanic creative endeavor. From around 1803 to around 1809, Beethoven was the hero. Not even such an organ disability as his deafness could daunt him. He had conquered this affliction. He had now one ambition: to fulfill himself as an artist. Beethoven's capacity for a deep and passionate realization of suffering had a corresponding capacity for endurance and an enormous power of self-assertion. No artist ever lived whose work gives a greater impression of indomitable strength. Let's continue with two more sonatas, numbers 19 and 20. They are two-movement sonatinas which predate the first sonatas of Opus 10 from 1795. These are labeled Opus 49. These pieces were published without Beethoven's sanction, but the great Sir Donald Francis Tovey is happy for them. As he says, we might otherwise have been deprived of the two most beautiful sonatinas within the range of small hands and young players. Both are in two movements. Let's hear from both sonatas, David. Opus 49, number 1 and 2, G minor, and then G major. Eugene Nistoman told me that he played the little G major, the last one, when he was a little child of 8 or 9 for Rachmaninoff. Imagine playing for Rachmaninoff. You think you're scared now? We now come to the sonata in C major, Opus 53, the great Waldstein, dedicated to his patron. It is of mighty dimensions. The work was composed in 1804, the year that brought forth the Eroica itself, the symphony that Beethoven had dedicated to Napoleon. But when Napoleon became emperor, he savagely tore the title page. He said, just another tyrant. In the Waldstein, Beethoven plunges into I can't pronounce the word, into a mighty rhythm. I did before.
What was the word?
Inexorable rhythm.
Oh, inexorable.
Good.
about this?
Yes.
It's real unusual in that the second theme of the first movement is in E major with a original key of C major. It's very unusual key relation. So we have this theme, and then it goes into there's this wonderful transition. It's torture to keep starting and stopping like this.
In the molto adagio, which serves as an introduction to the gigantic rondo, Beethoven is at the height of inspiration. A flash of genius, as Kempf says, illuminating the twilight between major and minor. The rondo theme is as radiant as a temple in the first light of dawn. The next sonata, Opus 54, has become overshadowed, being between those giants, the Waldstein and Appassionata. The first movement is a huge, stylized, he calls it, in tempo of a minuet, and the form has no precedent in music. Let's hear a bit.
I'll do a little bit from that storm.
Oh, I love it. The second movement and the last, it's a two-movement sonata, is remarkable for its transparency and its intrinsic strangeness. It's composed in an unbroken flow of even notes through many keys. David, is it possible to play the whole thing? It's not too long. I really think we must have this because nobody ever gets to hear this. Do it. We come to the last sonata discussed today. What can one say of the Appassionata? Such might, such perfection of form. It is one of the great works of Beethoven, burning passion, a depiction of a mighty struggle. The second movement is a perfect foil. It's a set of variations which lead to the pulsating violence of the finale. Here is Beethoven shaking his fist at tragedy. On December 11th, we continue our journey through these sonatas as we enter Beethoven's last years, his final period. Beethoven's sense of affirmation takes a very new tone. His isolation through deafness is now complete. He begins to hear music in a different sphere than in the middle period. Sullivan says, Beethoven is now using the art of music to express a vision of life, to create states of consciousness in which the human race had not yet expressed through art. I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, but I really do want to end with what Beethoven's a wonderful dinner he had in a Vienna hotel. And the writer says that when he took him there, the Viennese repasts are famous all over Europe, and that ordered for us was so luxurious that Beethoven could not help making remarks on the profusion which it displayed. Beethoven said, "Why such a variety of dishes? Man is but little above other animals if his chief pleasure is confined to a dinner table." So be careful on Thanksgiving, but don't let me Don't let me dissuade you from eating all you want. Thank you.